Hello. Oh. That's all right. Thanks. All right. Are we up and running?
Nearly.
All right, there we go. Hello, everyone. This is the last talk of this conference. And I know it makes us all a little sad. But maybe also it makes us a little bit relieved. I mean, it was a big night last night with the boat party and all that. And we'd like to thank Leonard, Matej, and Pedro for organizing these really fun 2 days. So a big round of applause to them. We also like to salute all the other speakers that have shared their experiences and thoughts with us. It's been really inspiring, so also an applause for them. Well, we are, as mentioned, Viktor and Alastair, and I'm the designer.
I'm Alastair. I'm an engineer.
And we both work for Google. And more specifically, we work for the material design team. And it's a cross-functional team, so we don't really have our own product per se, unless you call material design a product. And we have been involved in most of the major design changes at Google. From the first real, the first real big design change. I guess you all remember what Google was. Yeah, it wasn't very good. And we went through this first major overhaul, which we called Project Kennedy. And we called it Project Kennedy because we had to basically, our CEO at the time who came back, Larry, he asked us to basically redesign the whole company within 3 months. And we were like, oh man, that's like as hard as it was to probably land the first man on the moon. So it got called Project Kennedy.
And then, not after Kennedy, we decided that we needed a design system to base a lot of our mobile apps and desktop apps on. And so we ended up working on a design system called Material Design.
Oh, it always does that. I don't know why it stops. Anyway.
And not only did we make a design system, but we also try to build the code that powers it. So we call that material components.
And maybe the latest, most public thing we did was the rebranding of Google itself. There was many teams involved, and we were one of the kind of stakeholders in that project. And the nature of our work requires a lot of collaboration with most of the 150 plus or so product teams at Google. And we work with them on both web and native applications, with both designers, engineers, the vice presidents, the product managers, the project managers. And you might say, oh man, that sounds like a lot of work. And yeah, but actually, it's mostly just a lot of talking. And that's basically what we're going to talk about today. Throughout both of our careers, there's always been a lot of talk about how designers and developers can work better together. A lot of the talks have been about this conference as well. And it seems to be an issue that we can't really wrap our head around. We have tried so many different things. We've tried to move ourselves around in the office to sit next to each other, or left or right or behind, or I don't know. We've tried so many different things. We've tried to spec out every single little pixel on the screen for hours and hours and hours so you kind of hand something over to someone that's just like, huh, what's that? And despite all of our efforts, it seems like we never really fully understand each other. like we are talking or speaking a completely different language, or at least like a very heavy dialect of some obscure language. And so let me go through a little bit of an exercise to kind of showcase what I mean. Can anyone tell me here what this is? Anyone? Right, it's a book, very good. All right, next one. What is this then? A Mac? Yeah. It's a computer, you know, but iMac is still a computer, so I would say that that's correct. And then anyone can tell me what this is? It's a shoe. Really, really well done. Yeah, a round of applause for everyone. And we all know these things, and it's super simple for us because we share a common language. That language today is English, but we share a common language and we understand these things. And all that language really is just a bunch of people like yourselves just agreeing to understand each other. There's nothing more complicated than that, really. And beyond the meaning of the word itself, we also know the usage of the word and the usage of the object of the word itself. So like, we all know that you don't wear your shoes on your head, for example. Even though that might be something that we will do at some point. I don't know. Okay, let's move on. What is this then? Yeah, it's a little bit trickier because I just made it up. It's a clud. And yeah, it doesn't mean anything. It's just like it's actually a word in Swedish, which I figured like not a lot of you guys speak anyway, so sorry for the Swedish guys. This is what you already know this, but what what are these then? Oh yeah, I think you said it. They are cluds, right? Even if you have no idea what the word means or what it is, we know how to use the words. And it's kind of, I watched this TED Talk the other night, and it's basically like the laws of physics. She said something like, no one has ever said, or your mom never told you when you went out, like, have a great day, eat your vegetables, don't defy laws of gravity. Like, no one said that, because we don't need to be reminded that we can't really fly, you know? And the same goes for language and the way we speak. There are so many things that we don't need to be reminded of, and we just assume things, and we understand things. So let's go back to look at some stuff from our everyday work life. Can anyone tell me what this is? I think I heard tabs somewhere. Yeah, it could be tabs, but are they segment controls? I guess technically they are segment controls. But wait, what are these then? That's awfully quiet. Are they tabs? I guess they could be. Or is it just like bottom navigation? Or are they both? This one I don't even know what to call it. Maybe it's an accordion list or an expansion list. The point is that there are so many things in our work day that we don't have a shared language for. Therefore, we also lack the kind of fundamental laws of physics of our language as well. So imagine yourself having a conversation with someone, and for everything you said, you had to also explain kind of the laws of physics of that language. It would be really horrible. And that's kind of like the conversations that we have at work. So the point is that we haven't really agreed to understand each other. And yeah, it has always actually been really crucial to what we do. Even if you were an engineer or kind of like a stone carver or an architect or graphic designer or anything, it was really crucial that we were able to communicate with each other to kind of get the outcome that we wanted. So we didn't do this kind of weird stuff, which still happens. Or like, so most of the vocabulary that we use today in design is very old, and it has evolved over time. We tend to think of this problem as something brand new in our world, that, oh, we have this communication problem within like engineers and designers. And actually, it's always been a shared responsibility between the maker and the designer, or the people in any group that try to come up with something to communicate well with each other. And as I mentioned, the language we use in design is very old, and it's evolved over time in very close conjunction with the technology that we use. So, for example, the word typeface. It comes from the time where we carved type out of wooden blocks for the printing press. And the side of the wooden block with the type on it was called the face of the type. Therefore, it's called typeface today. And for those that doesn't know, leading is basically the size of the space between text of lines. And it comes from the lead strip that you inserted between the lines of text in this old kind of printing press. And this is a pretty funny one, because the reason we called uppercase letter uppercase is because we used to store them in the upper part of the case. And the same goes for the lowercase letters. My point is that as technology evolved, so did the way we designed, and so did the way we communicated about design. And in the time of Gutenberg and the first printing press, things were a little bit easier, because the person who designed whatever they printed back then, I don't know, like a Bible or something, were probably the same person who carved the letters and maybe even built the damn press. So basically, you only had to understand yourself, and sometimes I struggle with that as well. But in general, that is easier. And it wasn't really until the Industrial Revolution where we kind of separated the making of something, or the engineering of something, and the designing of something. And that's when we kind of, I'm not sure if they actually called it this, but we introduced the infamous term design handoff. It just never really works well. We have this kind of separation, and we hand stuff off, and it just never really works. In this world where we kind of suddenly had to design something and then specify it and hand it over to someone to actually make it, for a graphic designer, for example, if you didn't understand the process and were able to talk the same language as the photographer, the printer, the typesetter, the art director, the client, all of these people, you were not able to do your work. You were not able to get the quality out of the work that you wanted to have. It required a deep domain knowledge about not only your profession, but all the other professions that you were relied upon to achieve your work. That meant that there was only like a handful of people that could actually pull this off. And they also, it's kind of funny, they really like to dress in like lab coats and stuff, the old graphic designers. And they also struggle with this problem. Because graphic design was basically only mentioned, I think it was first mentioned in the 20s or something like that, and it was a new profession. So they also didn't really know how to talk about things in a very efficient way. So there was a lot of efforts at this point in time to kind of standardize design vocabulary, such as the International Typographic Style, for example. There are many other examples of this. And many of these kind of standards, like the Swiss grid, for example, are things that we heavily rely on today. But nothing really ever stays the same. So we managed to standardize some things, but then the next technological revolution came around. with the arrival of the personal computer and the internet, along came a lot of possibility as well. So in the 90s, cheap software became available to pretty much anyone with a personal computer to make things that previously required a large group of people and many, many hours of like hard work to achieve that. The demand for graphic designers decreased drastically. Most companies are like, I have this computer now and I have this software, why don't I just do it myself? And why do I have to pay all this money when I can just do it myself? And to some extent, I actually think that was a really good wake-up call for designers as well, to just like really think about what we do. And in this new world, yeah, I think we can all remember this. The websites and the mediums at hand were not very attractive for designers. They were very limiting in the way that we can express kind of anything visual. So we ended up in a world where the modern kind of designer and the modern engineer really didn't evolve together for a long time. And at least not as closely as we used to do. And we ended up today where we are so dependent on each other to create our work again, but we have no shared language of how to express our kind of goals or how do we achieve that. I think these are Swedish people, by the way. And I mean, I found myself in many meetings just trying to explain like a motion behavior for like a button or something, only using sound effects. It's not really effective. But that's the kind of, we have no real good words for it. Today also we have kind of introduced this more complexity. We have to no longer only talk to each other, we have to like use a language that computers can understand too. Or otherwise maybe this can happen, I don't know. Yeah, so we know that this problem is not something new. It has been our shared responsibility to kind of try to understand each other. So how can we move forward and try to solve this issue? And in our team, in the material design team, we thought about this and said maybe we need a new wave of kind of design standards. And to a large extent, that's what we did with material design. To create a common vocabulary to talk about design both as a designer and as an engineer. For example, how we talk about color. It's kind of inconvenient to have to all the time reference like exact hex codes. So what if we come up with a simple color system where you can define the hex colors once, and then you just say like, oh, I want that button to be red 500. And in your project, you just say red 500. That was easy. Or how we talk about measurements. In an environment where we see more and more kind of device screen size and all kinds of stuff out there, it becomes really confusing how you talk about the sizes of things. How we talk about layout and alignment and spacing in a consistent way. How we talk about our components and the states of them. And how we talk about patterns, such as navigation, for example.
So just talking about these components isn't quite enough, though. If we all agree that, if we all agree that we are not speaking the same language and we've diverged, we need to start somewhere to try to converge these languages. So the first thing to do is probably to look at the vocabulary that we use. And I'm going to go through 2 examples in material design where we've had to make up new words for these new concepts that we're using, and talk about them in a way to judge whether they're like good or bad. So the first is this. This is the floating action button. We gave it a name. We called it a floating action button. And this is an example of a good name. When I say floating, you know it's floating on top of something. When I say an action, we know there's an action contained in it. And it's a button, so you know that you can press it. And when I use this name, I can easily explain to people, or if I don't know the history of this component, I can quickly understand what I am expecting. So this is a snack bar, right? So when I say snack bar, you probably think about this thing. But actually, this is the thing that we talk about when we say snack bar. And this is a confusing name, because it doesn't look like there are any snacks in it. I mean, it's an example of a bad name that was an in-joke of another name. So actually, where this name came from was initially this was called a toast. And a toast is something that is kind of funny because it's a pop-up that comes up from the bottom like a toast from a toaster. But unfortunately, we were already using that name for something else. So we decided to make an in-joke of the name toast and called it a snack bar. So what I want to highlight here is, sometimes we make mistakes here, but names shouldn't have historical knowledge, right? So you shouldn't need to know historical knowledge or even insider knowledge on why this name exists. So those two examples are just design examples. Developers, though, they make up names all the time, too. We do this all the time. Like, I do it nearly every day, where I'm writing a new bit of code, and I'm naming a function, I'm naming a class, I'm naming a file. And when we make up names, we don't think about who's going to use it. We think about whether it makes sense to us. We may, if we're lucky, work with a team. We may think about what the team thinks about this name. But we definitely don't think about what the designer thinks. Unfortunately, those names actually affect what designers talk about. So here's a pet peeve example of mine. So this is the title bar. The title bar, as you all know, if I say this, you know it's a bar that contains a title, maybe some controls, lives inside maybe a window on a Mac or on Windows. But the same concept has been renamed over and over again in the intervening years. It's called a header on the web. It's called a navigation bar on iOS. It's called an app bar on Android. Right? So how can the same concept have so many different names on all these different places? Oops. So this is just one example of how developers naming things can have an effect on making the language more confusing. There are many, many examples like closure and blocks and so forth that I could talk about. But if we want to really collaborate and try to create a common language, we need to start making it consistent within our own domains, within the design domain and within the developer domain. And assume that your name that you make up is going to be used somewhere else, and it's going to have to be understandable by people who don't actually speak your language. So if you all agree with what me and Viktor has said here, is that we need a common language to unify our professions together. And the language is fundamental because if we don't have this language, if we don't have this shared language, it makes it really hard for us to collaborate. So I'm going to end this talk by talking about 3 different ways that we think we can at least start moving towards a common language. So the first one is a very easy one. It is just translation. Think of it as Google Translate for design speak and engineering speak. If you think about this, we're not really solving the problem. We still have these 2 languages, but we're paper-overing this problem. So when you say an app bar, I say header bar, title bar. Another way to think about it is, how I like to think about it, is a unit of knowledge. So you're trying to get one design concept from a designer to an engineer, or you're trying to get one engineering concept from engineering to design. And I sort of encapsulate that as a unit of knowledge. So you're passing in this little parcel that goes from one place to another. And this goes so we already have this. It's in plain sight. We use it every day. It's called PNGs, SVGs. This is a really good example of this. A developer knows how to create a PNG. A designer knows how to a designer also knows how to create a PNG. A developer knows how to use a PNG and show it on the screen. A designer also, when given a PNG, knows how to import it into their workflow. So this is a really good example of this, and there's tons of examples that we're working on that we've heard about today around Lottie and other things, where we're trying to make sure that we can translate between these 2 domains. So the second thing is we are going to invent new things. We're going to invent new things. So before you come up with a new name for a new thing, think about where that has come from. Think about the prior art. In research, we will actually go and look for prior art. We'll reference where this concept has come from. I think we as a community should try to do that more. Try to reference where the concept has come from, even if it's in different domains. And if you come up with a new name, go run it by your designer, run it by your developer to see if they've already made up a name for that. I'll illustrate this with an example that frustrates me quite a lot. So this is an animation curve. It's an easing curve where you see this object move into the destination, and but slows down when it moves in. In traditional animation terms, like the Disney style of animation, this is actually called a slow-in. So it sort of slowly goes in. But in our modern motion tools, like CSS or iOS animation, we call this ease out. So you already noticed there's an issue here. This is one concept that is similar, but has totally opposite sounding names. So our designers and developers argued about this for weeks, actually, about which name to actually give this. And we eventually ended up in the camp of the animation curve, the Disney animation, where we think it was useful to use the older name, the more historical name, because there's new motion designers, new animators coming into our field, and we want them to feel familiar with what that name is. We could have done what this comic has sort of pointed out, which is created an entirely new name because we weren't satisfied with ease in, ease out, or slow in, slow out. So the third thing here is every language needs a dictionary. So every language needs a glossary of all the terms that we use. With the material motion example that I just shown, we actually wrote down the decision of our naming, and we also illustrated it with examples and referenced engineering code snippets to show you how do you translate that concept into code. And so we do this a lot in material design. So if you ever go through the material design guidelines, we do this a lot to try to simplify things for engineers and designers, to try to unify those languages. But it's really important to write it down. Material design is probably one of the more comprehensive places for design documentation, but there are other places like the W3C and Unicode Consortium where they're virtually doing the same thing in different domains. But I would encourage you to go back to your team or your organization or whatever it is to try to write down those terms, that jargon, so that your designers and engineers are actually working together on the same words. So those are just three very simple examples of things that we can start doing today that are very easy, that we can try to help unify these languages. But at the end of the day, it's all about empathy, it's all about collaboration, it's all about communication. So if you want to learn a new language, you don't just read a book. You actually have to go speak it. You have to go talk to people. So I'd encourage you to all talk to your designers, talk to your engineers more, exchange those information so that you can actually begin to speak a common language. You know, I like to say that this conference has been amazing to see a lot of designers and developers be together and listen to the same talks and understand things together. And I hope that now that you realize that you're speaking a slightly different dialect, a slightly different language, that eventually you'll converge and come to a single language, and hopefully build better things, collaborate better, and then live happily ever after. Thank you. All right. I think we still have some time for any questions.
If anyone has some questions.
I have a question about, this talk was about how you can come up with a common language between developers, designers, maybe product managers. It's all within one company. How would you approach the issue that you have to actually talk to clients? You're not making your own apps. You're making apps for your clients. And how do you convey certain, like idioms and designs to your clients? What is the best approach to that, you think?
That's a very good question, and I don't think there's one good answer to that question. I don't think even material design is one good answer to what we're trying to do. I think maybe, just an idea, maybe you take a little time to just explain things, It might just be as easy as that, of just like, here are the things and the things we talk about, and here's what they mean. And you're going to hear this a lot, and you're going to hear that a lot. And we just want to have that we have like a shared understanding of what we're talking about when we're talking about it. Maybe, I don't know.
I'll add that, like, one of the other, like, we could have then expanded this to 3 different languages, which is like business speak versus designer speak versus engineering speak. So you know, same thing. Like, you're trying to establish a common language between the two. Like, I often joke as engineers, what designers call redesigning, we call refactoring. You know, and then there is a business person who will call it reorganizing, right? Reorging things.
Yeah.
So understanding what that translation is, and maybe trying to speak in those terms rather than speaking around design terms.
Yeah, I think the point is that we just have to acknowledge that it's our own responsibilities. I think a lot of the times, a lot of designers, including me, is like, oh, why don't you just understand what I mean? Instead of thinking about your own part of it all. And it's kind of like, ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country a little bit.
Project Kennedy, right there.
Yeah.
Hi there. The way I see it, in a nutshell, I think that material design is a design language system in the platform level. I'd be curious to know what you think of design language systems on the app level, like Carbon, Lightning, or even what Airbnb has been doing.
I think material design, the purpose of material design was not to be kind of like one-size-fits-all design system that you should just take it and copy everything, right? It was meant to be a foundation to build upon. And I think it meant to cover kind of like the most basics of things. So you don't like reinvent the wheel for navigation all the time, for example. However, if you do have a better way of navigating your users around the app, feel free to do so. That's great. But I do think there's a whole other level of design system is how you talk to your users, basically. And that means like how do you kind of portray your brand in your products? Like, how does your buttons look like? All these things. Material design is kind of like a little bit of under the hood, and the kind of the red thread throughout app development. But there's a whole other level of things that you can build your own system. You can build your own system on top of material design, basically.
Was this material design in any way influenced by what Apple did with the flat design? I mean, they came out iOS 7, and you said you used it internally for a longer time. So the question is, I mean, obviously you potentially don't want to come up with a total different system than Apple, or did you not even look at them?
I think
I
we
love
looked
this
at
question.
everything that is good. And our goal was not really to just like, we don't want to be like Apple. We actually wanted to create standards about how we do things. And I think a lot of the things that Apple has done for a long time, you know, a lot of the patterns just make sense. So why not do that, you know? So definitely, yeah.
Yeah, I would say even like Kennedy, which Viktor mentioned, right? That was very flat. In fact, we actually had to add a little bit of dimensionality because, like in our user research, it was too flat.
Yeah. I don't personally like to talk about flat design that much, or any other kind of. What does flat design mean, really?
I don't know.
Yeah,
I'm not a
right.
designer.
Like, no, I never understood what it was. Is it like not use of? So we talked about it earlier, and you say like, oh, but I don't like the gradients, and I was like, well, can't a gradient be flat?
Yeah, you can. I guess you can have flat gradients.
So I think it's better to just talk about design and then not try to categorize things too much in like Apple or Google or flat or not or something like that. Just try to find the things that solves the problem, because that's all design is really. It's just problem solving. That's it.
No more questions.
All right.
All right. Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much.